If you asked 100 people on the street to name two political figures who are complete and total opposites, almost all of them would immediately say Barack Obama and Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we're talking about two leaders who seem to exist in entirely different universes, culturally, politically, stylistically, just night and day.
Right. But what if I told you that, according to some of the top policy minds at the Hoover Institution, their ultimate overarching goals for America's role in the world are actually exactly the same?
I mean, it sounds like a punchline, or maybe a typo in the research, honestly.
Yes, it really does. But that contradiction is our mission for this deep dive, because you have shared an incredible stack of sources with us today.
Yeah, we've got academic discourse analyses, leadership trait studies from Leiden University, policy papers from the Hoover Institution, and journals on ethical leadership.
And we are going to use all of that to compare the mechanics, the psychology, and the raw data behind their leadership styles. And, you know, what these contrasting styles mean for the actual future of the United States.
But before we take another step, we really need to lay down an important disclaimer for you, the listener.
Absolutely. The sources we are dissecting today contain some pretty politically charged analysis drawn from both the left and the right.
Right. And we are not taking sides here.
Not at all. We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints presented in these papers, and we absolutely are not here to pass judgment on either leader. Our goal is strictly to impartially report and synthesize the ideas contained in your original source material.
Yeah, we're looking at the engine of American leadership, not voting on the paint job, so to speak.
I like that. Okay, let's unpack this. Start us off with that Hoover Institution essay by Russell A. Berman.
So Berman argues that the public perception of Obama and Trump as these massive geopolitical polar opposites is actually largely a byproduct of a highly polarized press.
Because the media has a vested interest in making them look as far apart as possible, right?
Exactly. It drives engagement to maximize that distance between Democrats and Republicans. Yeah. But Berman argues that both presidents fundamentally diagnosed the core American problem the exact same way.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, they both believed in prioritizing the domestic condition over foreign ambition.
Oh, wow. Okay, I mean, Obama's major rallying cry in this arena was nation building at home.
Right, and Trump's was make America great again.
So the phrasing targets completely different demographics, but the underlying diagnosis is identical. They both took office recognizing this massive hollowing out of middle America.
Yeah, they both saw the very real decline of blue-collar manufacturing jobs, the stagnation of median incomes, and just the financial and physical exhaustion of decades of overseas intervention.
So they basically both argued that foreign policy is a zero-sum game and the United States was losing.
Precisely. They both concluded the U.S. needed to do significantly less abroad so it could do more at home. Berman actually frames Obama as practicing an anti-imperialism from the left.
Like leading from behind.
Yeah, exactly. In the wake of the Bush administration's heavy interventions, Obama established this rhetoric of ratcheting down global leadership, minimizing the American footprint, while encouraging allies to take point.
And then Trump brought in anti-imperialism from the right, which manifested more as neo-isolationism.
Right. He actively wanted to wind down overseas engagements, question historical alliances, and aggressively redirect those billions of dollars in military resources back inside American borders.
But I mean, as you can imagine, bringing up this shared vision theory in public is basically like dropping a lit match in a fireworks factory.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And the sources capture that friction beautifully. The comment section of that Hoover Institution article was essentially a digital riot.
I bet. People were furious, right?
Oh, yeah. You have a commenter named LaPearl pointing out that even if they both want to repair the domestic condition, the actual levers they want to pull to achieve it are miles apart.
Well, sure. And there was another one, Robo94117, right, who went after the author directly.
Yeah, asking how a Hoover fellow could possibly equate the two when their approaches to environmental regulation, worker safety, and immigration are structurally opposite.
Which is totally fair. Those commenters are highlighting the exact paradox we are trying to solve today. The policy mechanisms they prefer are fundamentally incompatible, even if the destination is the same.
Right, the mechanisms are different.
Think of it like two different architects hired to renovate the same deteriorating historic house. They both do the walkthrough and agree completely on the macro level problem.
They both say the house needs to stop trying to build massive extensions into the backyard, right?
Exactly, and focus entirely on fixing its own cracked foundation. But architect A wants to secure the foundation using modern glass and steel, And architect B wants to rebuild it using traditional brick and mortar.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. But it begs the question, if their ultimate geopolitical destinations are that similar, why does it feel to the public like they're driving 100 miles an hour in opposite directions?
Well, to figure out why the public pursues it that way, we have to stop looking at their policies and start looking at the steering wheel. I mean, the actual words they use.
The discourse analysis.
Yes, the sources include this fascinating contrastive discourse analysis by Kazanya Pitarch. And what's cool is this study completely ignores political ideology.
It just runs their transcripts through a linguistic meat grinder to find their raw linguistic fingerprints.
Exactly. So let's start with Trump's linguistic fingerprint. The analysis categorizes his discourse as populist and highly informal. He relies heavily on what researchers call I talk.
And when he pivots away from I, he leans into an exclusive we that is always positioned against a very clearly defined they.
Right. He is constantly framing an enemy, whether it's the press, the establishment, or foreign nations. Plus, his sentence structures are incredibly short.
And his language is overwhelmingly focused on immediate action rather than abstract concept.
Yeah, and the study actually quantifies this using a specific metric called the formal over deictic ratio.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener, because deictic is one of those academic words that makes eyes glaze over.
Oh, for sure.
Deictic is just a fancy linguistics term for pointing words. These are words that depend entirely on context to make sense. Words like me, here, now, this, or that.
It's highly immediate, in-the-moment language.
Exactly. So when you measure formal, descriptive language against that immediate deictic language, you get a mathematical ratio of how a person thinks.
And Trump's formal over deictic ratio is a shockingly low plus 1.69.
Which means his speech is almost entirely action-oriented. It's packed with verbs, adverbs, and those pointing words, rather than being laden with heavy nouns and complex descriptions.
And the analysis points out how this specific ratio works as a political tool. I mean, this isn't just a stylistic quirk. It's a mechanism for mobilization.
Right, because short, action-oriented, us versus them language triggers a psychological sense of urgency and in-group protection.
Exactly. If you are a blue-collar worker feeling deep economic anxiety about a changing world, a plus 1.69 linguistic style cuts through the noise. It speaks directly to that anxiety by favoring raw emotion and proximity over cold rationalism.
So then contrast that with Obama's fingerprint, which uses a completely different structural framework.
Yeah, where Trump uses the exclusive we against an enemy, Obama relies heavily on the humble, inclusive we.
Instead of framing an adversary, his speeches frequently try to synthesize opposing sides by referencing a patriotic, epic past.
And this maps perfectly onto the work of moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt, which the sources weave in here. Haidt talks about this concept called the hive switch.
The hive switch, like bees.
Yeah, exactly. The idea is that human beings have this evolutionary psychological ability to temporarily transcend our own self-interest and lose ourselves in something larger than ourselves, like a tight-knit community or a national purpose.
Okay, so Obama's inclusive rhetoric is practically engineered to trigger that hive switch. He's trying to unify individual self-interest into a massive group goal.
Right. And structurally, his language reflects the immense complexity of trying to pull that off. His sentences average 21.85 words.
Which is nearly double Trump's average length.
Yeah. And his formal over-deictic ratio is wildly different. It sits at a massive plus 17.4.
Plus 17.4, and so his speech is highly descriptive, incredibly precise, and deeply formal. He relies heavily on nouns and prepositions to build complex intellectual architecture.
And the discourse analysis definitely leans toward presenting Obama's complex 21-word per sentence structure as the, more elevated or sophisticated way to lead a modern democracy.
Which, honestly, I have to push back on. I mean, the academic framing of that study seems to imply that a plus 17.4 EO ratio is objectively better, but is a highly formal, heavily descriptive style actually a massive liability today?
That's a really good point.
Because we live in an era of shrinking attention spans, dominated by TikTok, Instagram Reels, and Twitter. Maybe Trump's plus 1.69 action-oriented speech isn't just some populist tactic to manipulate the working class.
You're saying it's an adaptation?
Yeah. Maybe that shorter, punchier style is just a ruthless adaptation to modern communication technology. If you speak in 21-word descriptive paragraphs today, you might get praised by academics, but half the country has already swiped past your video.
That is a phenomenal critique of the source material. Is the 21-word sentence just a relic of a bygone pre-algorithmic era?
Right.
Because even the discourse analysis concedes that shorter, action-oriented messages are retained better and are significantly more persuasive to the modern ear. Trump's style is undeniably effective at piercing through the sheer volume of modern information overload.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because what the sources reveal next is that the language a leader uses doesn't just dictate how they sound on television.
No, it reflects the fundamental psychological machinery of how they process reality.
Which brings us to the Leiden University Leadership Trait Analysis, or LTA. This is where the deep dive gets really fascinating.
Yeah, the researchers didn't just listen to the speeches. They used specialized software to analyze transcripts and score both men on 7 specific psychological traits.
And the software operates by looking at the microscopic structural choices in their language, right?
Exactly. For example, to measure a trait like distrust, the software doesn't just look for angry words. It scans for the frequency of qualifying clauses, adversarial syntax, and hesitation markers whenever foreign actors are mentioned.
So it looks for how often a leader frames interactions as a zero-sum conflict versus a cooperative opportunity.
Exactly. And they applied this LTA software to one of the most consequential policy decisions of the modern era, the Paris Climate Accord.
The ultimate global group project involving nearly 200 nations.
Right. So according to the LTA, Obama possesses a collegial leadership style. He scores moderate on his belief in his own ability to control events and moderate on his need for power.
But the most critical data point is his score on the trait of distrust, which is remarkably low.
Because he has low distrust and a moderate need for power, he inherently respects political constraints. He assumes a baseline of good faith when dealing with the international community.
So when Obama's psychological framework processed the Paris Accord, he saw a necessary cooperative effort.
Yeah, he saw a framework where 200 nations could pool their resources, respect mutual boundaries, and fight global warming. Therefore, he signed it.
But then the LTA establishes Trump as having an actively independent leadership style, and his psychological scores are the complete inverse.
Completely. He scores very high on belief in his own ability to control events, high on need for power, and his score on distrust is off the charts.
Meaning he is inherently deeply suspicious of the motives of other players in the political environment. He fundamentally operates on the belief that mutual trust is a myth, especially internationally.
And because he possesses that combination of high need for power and immense distrust, he actively challenges constraints. He refuses to be boxed in by multilateral agreements.
So when Trump's psychological framework processed the exact same Paris Accord, he didn't see a cooperative partnership at all.
No, he saw a draconian economic trap. He calculated that the agreement would saddle the U.S. with up to $3 trillion in lost economic output and kill domestic jobs, all while allowing rival nations to take advantage of American compliance.
As a result, he exited the agreement. And he did this despite intense coordinated pressure from within his own party. The sources note that 17 prominent Republicans reportedly tried to convince him to stay in the accord.
But his actively independent trait profile drove him to reject those internal constraints just as aggressively as the external ones.
The exact same document, the exact same global data processed by 2 different psychological engines, resulting in 2 entirely opposite realities.
It really is wild when you lay it out like that.
It makes complete sense if you evaluate it like a joint business venture. The collegial leader, Obama, looks at the proposed contract and sees a syndication where everyone shares the load for a mutual benefit.
While the actively independent leader, Trump, looks at the exact same contract, the exact same clauses, and sees a convoluted scam designed to drain his company's wallet while the partners laugh behind his back.
The psychology literally determines the reality they perceive.
And that psychological reality dictates everything. It doesn't just determine how they handle international treaties. It dictates how they manage the vast machinery of the U.S. government and the explosive dynamics of the American public.
And managing the American public right now is essentially trying to diffuse a powder keg while jogging on a treadmill.
That's putting it mildly. Our sources from the VA Engaged Journal use a very specific, chilling term for the current state of the electorate: affective polarization.
Right, affective polarization.
Yeah.
How is that different from regular polarization?
Well, regular polarization is a standard feature of democracy. It means we disagree on policy. We debate over the tax code or healthcare funding or zoning laws. Affective polarization is a mutation of that. It means we don't just disagree on the issues. We actively distrust and feel profound, visceral hostility toward the people on the other side of the political divide.
It's emotional, it's tribal, and it views the opposing party not as fellow citizens with different ideas, but as an existential threat.
Exactly. And the journal argues this is incredibly dangerous for the survival of a democracy because it annihilates the baseline communication and trust required to reach any sort of compromise.
So how did these two radically different psychological profiles try to manage that hostility?
Well, Obama attempted to diffuse effective polarization by modeling what the academic sources call ethical leadership. His primary strategy was a concept known as flattening the hill.
Flattening the hill, like physically or metaphorically?
Both, actually. He actively tried to minimize the perceived distance between himself sitting at the apex of global power and his subordinates, or the general public, in order to foster trust and lower the temperature of the room.
Oh, right. The sources provided a striking visual example of this. There is a famous photograph taken by Pete Souza inside the Oval Office.
Yeah, for the young boy.
Yeah, a young black boy visiting the White House wanted to know if the president's hair felt like his own. And Obama, wearing a suit, standing in the center of the free world, physically bends over at the waist, lowering his head so the child can reach out and touch it.
And the journal highlights this not just as a heartwarming PR moment, but as Obama utilizing physical space to model humility without having to speak a single deictic or formal word.
He also attempted to flatten the hill politically, right?
Yes. The prime example was appointing his fierce primary rival, Hillary Clinton, to his cabinet as Secretary of State. The goal was to signal to the electorate a genuine willingness to integrate opposing factions and work across deep personal and political differences.
It was an attempt to prove that his 21-word sentences and his inclusive, we weren't just speechwriter tricks, but a functional governing philosophy.
Exactly. But then we introduced the actively independent style to the same powder keg. Trump utilizes what the sources categorize as a spectacle leadership style.
So rather than trying to flatten the hill and diffuse the effect of polarization, he leans into it. He amplifies the conflict.
Right, and his primary revolutionary tool for this was Twitter.
Twitter was the ultimate spectacle machine for a plus 1.69 linguistic fingerprint.
The journal cites research arguing that Trump's unprecedented reliance on social media as his primary form of presidential communication actively eliminates deliberation.
By leaning into his informal, highly combative, us versus them linguistic style on a platform structurally designed for instant emotional reactions, he allows hostility to fester.
Exactly. The format itself encourages the public to assert raw, unfiltered opinions and attack rivals, rather than engage in the slow, boring work of civic discourse.
But the president doesn't just have to manage the effective polarization of the public. They have to manage the government itself.
Oh, man, yeah.
And this brings us to arguably the most mind-bending insight in this entire stack of sources. We constantly hear narrative tropes about the deep state or the entrenched bureaucracy resisting the president's agenda.
Right, but the Iowa Law Review and the Center for Presidential Transition paint a much more complex, almost Machiavellian picture of how the government actually functions when a new leader takes the helm.
We have been conditioned to think of bureaucratic resistance as strictly vertical. Like, we picture the career civil servants at the bottom of the org chart bravely linking arms to resist the political appointees at the top of the org chart.
But the Iowa Law Review points out that the most effective, most damaging resistance in Washington is actually horizontal.
Horizontal warfare. We have to unpack exactly how this works because it completely changes how you view the executive branch.
Okay, so when a new president assumes office, they aren't just fighting a monolithic bureaucracy. The agencies are full of career officials who have been fighting intense, decade-long turf wars against other career officials. So let's imagine a hypothetical scenario. Say you have a faction within the Department of the Interior that wants strict land use enforcement, and a faction within the EPA that favors lenient enforcement. They've been at each other's throats since 1998.
Right. They despise each other.
A new president, let's say Trump or Obama, comes in and issues a broad executive order about streamlining government efficiency. The faction at the EPA doesn't resist the president.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Instead, they eagerly embrace the new policy and weaponize the word streamlining to justify defunding the specific enforcement division of their rivals over at the Department of the Interior.
It's Game of Thrones in the HR department. The president is sitting in the Oval Office thinking, great, my streamlining policy is being executed. But in reality, the crew is just using the captain's vague orders to settle 20-year-old blood feuds below deck.
Exactly. The president is just a pawn in a horizontal war they don't even know is happening.
And to compound the difficulty of steering the ship, the Center for Presidential Transition notes that the modern era is plagued by crippling confirmation delays in the Senate.
Yeah, even if a president wants to execute their vision, whether it's a collegial vision or an actively independent one, they face a massive logistical hurdle in simply getting their chosen people into the building.
We are seeing unprecedented high appointee turnover combined with a completely gridlocked confirmation process.
Which means that achieving any coherent policy goal is becoming structurally harder, regardless of who is sitting behind the resolute desk. The gears of the state are just grinding to a halt.
So what does this all mean? Bringing this all together, it paints a rather daunting picture for the future of the USA.
It really does.
We have deep affective polarization, where a significant portion of the country actively despises the other half. We have a rapidly shrinking collective attention span completely dominated by algorithms on TikTok and Twitter. We have horizontal bureaucratic warfare, where career staff use the president's directives to annihilate each other, and a confirmation process so broken you can barely staff a cabinet to manage the chaos.
It's a lot.
Given all of those systemic roadblocks, can a collegial consensus-building style like Obama's actually still function? Or does this modern, gridlocked, hyperpolarized system inherently demand an actively independent disruptor like Trump to just smash through the barricades?
That is the defining question for the future of American leadership. And synthesizing these sources reveals just how stark the choice is. We started with the Hoover Institution's surprising insight that, despite the deafening media spectacle, Obama and Trump shared a core macro vision.
A zero-sum calculation that America must retreat from expansive global policing to repair its domestic blue-collar foundation.
Right. But the mechanisms they used to pursue that shared destination were alien to one another. Kazimierz Pitarch's discourse analysis showed us how their linguistic frameworks are fundamentally opposed.
Obama's plus 17.40 ratio, building 21-word descriptive sentences and triggering the inclusive hive switch, versus Trump's plus 1.69 ratio, full of immediate action, I talk, and clearly defined enemies designed to mobilize working-class urgency.
And those linguistic fingerprints mapped perfectly onto the Leiden University LTA psychological profiles. We saw Obama, the collegial consensus builder, whose low distrust allowed him to see the Paris Accord as a functional partnership.
And we saw Trump, the actively independent leader, whose deep distrust made him view the exact same accord as a $3 trillion trap to be aggressively escaped.
Finally, we saw how those psychologies collide with the modern American state. Obama attempting to cure effective polarization with ethical, humble modeling and flattening the hill, versus Trump using the spectacle of social media to marshal a divided public.
All while both leaders face a labyrinth of horizontal bureaucratic warfare and confirmation gridlock. It is a staggering amount of complexity for one human being to navigate.
It really leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over, specifically for you listening.
Oh, absolutely.
As communication technology continues to ruthlessly shorten our attention spans, and as algorithms increasingly hyper-personalize our news feeds to keep us angry and engaged, will future presidents be forced to entirely abandon the 21-word, highly descriptive sentences of the past?
In a world where nuance simply doesn't go viral, and where horizontal bureaucracy requires a sledgehammer to move, is the actively independent, high-conflict, action-oriented style no longer just a populist tactic, but the only viable path left to win the White House?
If the GPS keeps telling us there's only one route left on the map that the car can actually drive on, where exactly is this country heading?
It is a question every voter will have to answer themselves.
Without a doubt.
On that note, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.